Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Israeli M50 Super Sherman. The model that you see here was built for commission and belongs to a private collector. Like I usually mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information will be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Before I continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. The model started off as a full option RC Tamiya 1/16 scale M4 105 HVSS Sherman tank kit. The model was pre-assembled by another model maker and featured pretty much built out of the box functions as well as external details, with the exception of some added external crew equipment that was seen in the previous photographs. The model was then disassembled in order for me to perform the Israeli M50 conversion that you see here. For the conversion itself, the tank utilizes a lot of aftermarket components, both that are tooled up from EastCoastArmory.com, as well as Shumo, and some 3D printed components that are from Shapeways. All of these details will be discussed in this video. The tank here replicates that of a early pattern M50 Sherman. This type of pattern of Sherman would be typically found in the late 1950s, also in the early to mid 1960s. The tank in this configuration here would be considered for pre-1967 Six-Day War. Also, as of note, the majority of M50 Shermans that you will see in photographs are typically based off of the long haul M4A4 Sherman, as these Shermans were the most common and prolific that were still found in Europe in the Commonwealth countries that used them during World War II. After World War II and after the Israeli War of Independence, the IDF were acquiring as many scrap and surplus Sherman tanks that they could find on the surplus scene in Eastern and Western Europe. At the time, these tanks here were starting to be phased out by European and U.S. Army, and acquisition of them was somewhat easy as they were very prolific due to the sheer amount of numbers that were produced. However, in addition to the long-hull Shermans, the Israelis also acquired lots of M4A3 short-hull and M4 105 tanks like you see here. These shorter hull versions of the Sherman also had the M50 conversion done to them as well. And that's the type of version that you see here represented in this model. Starting with the model suspension, the suspension that you see here is purely stock Tamiya. No mods were needed to have been made to them whatsoever. The only thing worth mentioning though is that like I mentioned on all these build videos, on top of the shock absorber where the two components meet, a little brush of silver paint really helps aid in the look of the model, as well as really improves accuracy. Also, to improve accuracy is the little drop of red paint on all of the Zerk fittings found on the road wheels and on the interior and exterior return rollers. The little drop of red paint also really makes the model pop and helps with the accuracy. As for the track is also purely against stock Tamiya, and this is perfectly acceptable for this pattern of vehicle here. Now, you will see a lot of aftermarket companies offering both the T66 metal link as well as the rubber chevron style link for the HVSS Sherman tank family. The issue is on Israeli tanks, those two patterns of track were not utilized. In fact, the Israelis went ahead and redesigned the American track in order to have the chevron be a little bit longer and taller compared to the American counterpart. However, the patterns look identical, and also the earlier American style track patterns were still utilized, as the Israelis did have a lot of these parts floating around in inventory. Our way to the front transmission cover. The cover has been modified from the Tamiya original in that the cover has its added cast texturing. The bolt strip seam was deleted. Also, this model here is replicated of that having the integral cast foot loops and toe eyes in order to mount up onto the vehicle. These components here are missing on the stock Tamiya kit and were added by myself. The integral casted toe eyes are sculpted out of epoxy, and everything is flared then in with the bodywork. If we go up to this portion here, I went ahead and fabricated the tow cable cleat, or the tow cable end clamp, as well as this other clamp which is found on Israeli Shermans. This clamp here is fabricated out of sheet metal, and this clamp here is fabricated out of styrene. Also, while on the front, we can see here the fender supports. The fender supports that you see here are fabricated out of sheet metal and are soldered together much in the same way as the 1/6 scale counterparts that I make. Moving to the rear portion of the model. Now, this is one area of the build that needs to have been reworked, as on Israeli Shermans, this whole area here differed greatly from the American counterpart. Starting here with the lower portion, this here is the same from the Americans, and what we have here are new added components from EastCoastArmory.com. The new ECA parts include the mount for the tow hitch, as well as the tow cable U-hook clamps. These components here are cast in resin and are listed on EastCoastArmory.com. Also listed on EastCoastArmory.com is the new Israeli Sherman rear engine firewall conversion set. The conversion set that you see here contains the elevated and smaller Israeli style engine hatch, as well as the Israeli style gooseneck exhaust. Now, keep in mind, the reason why Israeli tanks feature a different exhaust and engine firewall layout is because that the Israeli tanks were all upgraded with diesel engines as opposed to the radial engine or the GAA. Another feature that needs to be done in order to modify the tank to an Israeli style Sherman is that of the rear deck, or the rear plate here. The rear plate on the Israeli Shermans descend downward and are welded to the upper hull. The welded descending plate is very reminiscent to that of the M4A3 Sherman, in which this little feature is integrally built into the top deck. However, since the tanks, many of which were 105 Shermans like this one was here, the Israelis went ahead and added the extra plate in order to accommodate the little box feature that we have in the back. The descending piece here is all fabricated out of Lexan plastic, and both not only does it descend downward from here, but also connects to the rear hull with this little plate here. This is a mirror image on the opposite side. This needs to be done in order to have the tank be accurate. With the tank now placed on its side, you could see more of the work that went into the extending of the rear bottom plate. In addition to extending the rear plate and the side extensions like I mentioned before, you also need to have a plate extend from the rear firewall and then another bulkhead, and that would also act as a grill piece that would be fixed in this location here. All these components here are fabricated again out of Lexan plastic, which gives you a nice scale thickness and is actually very durable. In addition to the details, sculpted weld beads are present on both the extenders as well as on the shelf in the rear. Now, unlike the M51 Super Sherman, which I also built in this scale and have in my video listings, in which that one featured a similar modification, that one's hull needed to have been removed in a certain special way. Since then, I went ahead and made improvements to the design, and on this tank here, the top deck removes in the exact same way as it on the Tamiya kit original. No special treatment is required. You simply just pull the sides and lift up. And as you can see, there is no box or any type of other appendages that are connected to the rear part of the hull. Once the upper deck clicks back on, the component in the back is seamless. Other Israeli mods that were made is that of the footman loops, which are welded to the back plate, a telephone box. The telephone communication box that you see here is actually a new addition on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. It is a resin casted piece and contains all the components you see here in order to mount it to the tank. Just like on the real unit, it is actually elevated off the tank and does have its power cable detailing present on the resin kit. The rear storage rack that you see here is also the Israeli modified variant. The Israelis modified the American sheet metal rack in that they, instead of the American rack, which can fold up and then fold out of the way, the Israeli rack was welded directly to the rear plate and lost the ability to hinge upward. It would just hinge in the closed state. Also, as of note, a lot of post-war and end-of-life Shermans that were found in the Army Reserves and National Guard units during the 50s featured a similar modification. Another modification that was made was that of the gun cleaning stave mounts that we have here. They were simply pieces of plastic angle that were cut and mounted to the bottom portion of the rack. Once added, it also greatly helps the look of the vehicle. Moving our way to the side of the model, here we have pretty much a standard layout of equipment which is typically found on Israeli style Shermans. This layout is almost identical to the M51 that I built last year and is found on the video listings. Start with the tools are in the Israeli location. The tools themselves are the Tamiya kit originals. However, on Israeli tanks feature a slightly different layout compared to the American counterpart, which would feature most of the tools in this location here on the top. The vehicle is also equipped with the EastCoastArmory.com Israeli early pattern jerry can holders. They are found in these three locations here on this side of the tank. Also utilized was the Shumo or the SKP Israeli side storage bins. Now, this set here was resin, and these sets here have also become very hard to find as they are currently out of production. However, a nice alternative to the SKP set is found on shapeways.com and is actually done in 3D print. The vendor is listed below, and the component is highly recommended. Also utilized was that of a brand new part from EastCoastArmory.com, and that is of the Israeli spare track rack. The spare track rack set that we have here contains the tracks in their rack in it's all molded one piece and does have separate pins for the track links that we have here. All components are elevated off of the side of the hull, just like they would be on the real tank. Also, while on the side of the hull, the tank features the Shumo metal HVSS fender supports. I've used these several times on these 1/16 builds and are highly recommended, specifically if you are rebuilding or repairing an older Sherman. as the plastic ones might be broken or missing. Also, as a quick tip to greatly help the accuracy of the tank, I went ahead and modified the side fenders themselves. As you can see, I went ahead with the multi-master and added the cut lines on the fenders. Now, on the Tamiya kit, the fenders are molded and represented as one solid piece. However, on real Sherman tanks, they are actually comprised out of 3 separate pieces. 2 smaller ones, one in the back, or one in the front, one in the back, and a long one in the center. Adding the slit lines greatly helps the look of the tank, and the slit lines present is why these Shermans have dual supports that are in close proximity to each other on the side of the hull. Also added was the slit line running down the portion of the fender where it makes contact with the hull. This also helps the look of the model. And finally, what was also done to greatly help the look of these Shermans was with a small micro Dremel bit, you go ahead and add the holes on the side of the fender, which would be used for mounting on the tank's side skirts. Even though no side skirts are present, the fenders themselves are perforated. Moving to the opposite side, the layout is slightly different, but is also standard on most of these Israeli Shermans. It features the same fender mods that I did to the opposite side. It also features the EastCoastArmory.com Israeli track rack and jerry cans. The only difference is that on these versions here, the jerry cans are in a little bit different proximity as they are closer together on the center portion here of the hull in order to make room for the spare tires. 2 new additions to the EastCoastArmory.com product line, which are found on this model, are the Israeli-style auxiliary generator exhaust and the Israeli pattern spare tire racks. The auxiliary generator exhaust is found in the exact same location internally as the Little Joe auxiliary generator. However, unlike the American tanks, the Israelis went ahead and swapped out the unit with probably a more powerful and conventional unit of the time, and went ahead and mounted the exhaust in a small little muffler with a heat shield that is external outside the tank, mounted to the external fender. The ECA set has the muffler and the heat shield comprised out of 2 detailed resting components, which helps with the accuracy of the model. As for the tire racks themselves, the tire racks are also a new addition and have all of their bolt face and rib detailing and are designed to work with the Tamiya road wheels. Tamiya road wheels simply just bolt onto the racks in the same way that would be done on the real tank.